Hi, thanks for joining us. This is lesson number 11 in Preacher and His Work. We're so happy to have you as a part of the GSOP online program, and we're thrilled that you have a desire to be a gospel preacher. Now, as a gospel preacher, let's face it, there are going to be times that you feel like throwing in the towel. There are going to be folks who are disgruntled with you. There are going to be situations that rub you the wrong way. There are going to be times in which you just want to give it all up, and that's understandable. I suppose there are times in which we all think about giving it up. I think I mentioned before that the number one reason why preachers quit is because of insurance, money matters. And sometimes we have to make adjustments in our preaching lives because of things that are beyond our control. You know, with the rising cost of health care and things of that nature, sometimes we have to make adjustments, and those adjustments may mean that, we're a preacher that preaches when we can find opportunity, appointments, but we're working a secular job to put food on the table. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes that's what we have to do, to keep preaching the Word. But whatever happens to you, never quit preaching the Word of God, even if you have to make some adjustments in your schedule there. But there are two reasons why preachers give it up altogether. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. I want to talk about dealing with discouragement and disappointment in this particular course. And I hope that this will be one of the most beneficial courses that we've had out of all of them. Because there are going to be those times that you get down and get discouraged. Why is it that people get discouraged, specifically preachers? Why is it that preachers get discouraged and then ultimately just leave, just hang it all up? There are two reasons, I believe. Number one is because they're not trained enough. They don't get the kind of support, and they don't allow themselves to become equipped as they ought to be to preach. There's not a realization of the fact that discouragement will come. And so listen to me now. It's coming. It's going to happen. Don't let it ruin your life and cause you to quit altogether. So let's talk about that. Let's also talk about the fact that preachers quit, they give it up altogether because they don't know how to handle things. There was a man by the name of Elijah. You remember, 1 Kings chapter 18 and chapter 19. He got discouraged. He thought about hanging it up. You remember Jeremiah chapter 28 and 9? You remember how he got discouraged? He thought about giving it up, but he couldn't. There was a fire burning in him. Remember Peter and John in Acts chapter 3 and 4? How they were arrested? Well, they could have given it up, but they said, how can we stop preaching these things? We can't help but preach the things that we have seen and that we've heard. We give up sometimes because of people. Let me tell you who you're going to meet in the congregation for which you preach. This is not original with me, but I thought it was clever. You're going to meet Mr. Come On Strong, that type of personality. You're going to meet Mr. What this church needs is. You're going to meet Mrs. Occupying all your time, telling you about her troubles. You're going to meet Mr. Geezer in the congregation. You're going to meet Mr. Have you been to see so-and-so? In other words, are you doing your job? You're going to meet Mr. Always Correcting You. Not listening to what you say, just want to make sure they correct you. You're going to meet Mr. Never Commend You. Never have one positive thing to say about anything you say or do. You're going to meet Mr. Waste Your Time. She's probably kin to Mrs. Occupying Your Time. You're going to meet Mr. We Need a Sermon On. In other words, people who want to start dictating what you preach. You're going to meet Mr. Questions to No Avail. You're going to meet Mr. Brother Jones, our former preacher. You're going to meet Mr. These Elders Need. You're going to meet Mr. Chip on his shoulder. You're going to meet Mr. We are not getting equal time. and you're going to meet Mr. I'm going to watch how you spend your time. I want to keep my eyes on you, in other words. Well, we're going to meet folks in preaching that discourage us, that try to bring us down, whether willingly or not. We're going to meet folks like that, and we're going to think long and hard, is this really what I want to do? Do I want to be a preacher at all, in any shape or form? I want to encourage you not to be discouraged from preaching. I talked about a couple of reasons for discouragement. Let me give you some more. Things aren't always going to be the way we thought they would be. Someone you trust is going to betray a confidence. Key people in the congregation are going to be caught up in sin. A new convert, someone that you studied and you baptized, is going to leave the faith. And so things are not always going to be what you thought they would be. Efforts sometimes won't seem to be productive. They just won't. You'll pour your heart out, but it doesn't seem that it's accomplishing anything. You'll have long preparation hours, no responses. Why bother? Will be a question you'll ask. There will be a lack of support sometimes, but things will get better. Be encouraged. There will be brotherhood problems that will discourage you, and you'll think, well, why would I ever want to be a part of this? The extremes are, you can ignore it altogether, or you can jump on whatever bandwagon is going on right now and be a part of it, and that'll destroy you in other ways. So how do you overcome it? How do you get over discouragement and press forward? Recognize that people aren't your master. Jesus is. Now, you might receive a check each week or twice a month or once a month. And you may have the name of a church on it, but the church is not your employer. The Lord is. And you need to keep that in mind. The charge you have to be a preacher of the gospel is not a charge from the church or from elders. The charge is from Jesus Christ. You can be a gospel preacher anywhere and everywhere. Remember that. Look to the one who is your master and how he overcame discouragement. You know, discouragement even came to the best. Came to Jesus himself. Open your Bible to the book of Mark. Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, and let's look at two verses there. Verse 34 and 35. They shall mock him, that's Jesus, and shall scourge him, that's Jesus, and shall spit upon him, Jesus, and kill him, Jesus. And the third day he shall rise again. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come unto him, saying, Master, we would that thou shouldst do for us whatsoever we shall desire. He was discouraged, but yet he kept on doing what he was to do. Look at John chapter 1. John chapter 6. In verse number 66 it says, From that time many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. They didn't want a part of the difficulty that was facing the life of Jesus. And so deal with discouragement the way he did. He kept on. Avail yourself of divine help. Philippians chapter 4. The Bible there talks about the fact that we are to lean on God, and He will provide us the comfort that we need to keep going. Don't get in the habit of whining as a preacher. Ask yourself if we are to be the blame or we're part of the blame. Maybe some of the discouragement is because of something we're doing or not doing. Maybe it's deserved, in other words. Seems like preachers always blame the brethren. Sometimes preachers do need to blame themselves. Am I discouraging my own self? something to think about. So let's talk about criticism and how we ought not to let it get us down. It's the greatest cause of discontent among preachers. It's likewise the reason many leave the local pulpit. Realize you're going to be criticized. The only way that you can completely avoid criticism is simply doing nothing and saying nothing. But you can't be a gospel preacher and do that. When you trim yourself to fit everybody, you're going to finally whittle yourself away. You can't please everybody, because if you're pleasing everybody, you're lying to somebody, and that's no way to be. Be honest with yourself, with your God, with people. When you're in great company, or when you're criticized, rather, you're in great company. Paul was criticized. He was beaten. Jesus was criticized. He was killed. You're in great company as one who has to endure criticism. Make a friend out of your enemy. Make a friend out of your enemy. The Lord knows how. He said, practice the religion of a second mile. Do something good for your critic. Don't let them get you down. Remember, we said that it's really hard to have an enemy with someone that you're praying for. So keep that in mind. Also, in order to be fair, realize that all criticism is not unjust. Some criticism is deserved. Avoid overly criticizing yourself. Sometimes our worst critic is ourselves. Use criticism as a time or vehicle for self-evaluation, examination. Allow it to improve you. What are some areas in which you might be criticized as a preacher? Your appearance is going to be criticized. There will be people in the congregation that think that you dress up too nice. There will be people in the congregation that believe that you dress down too much. There will be people in the congregation that believe that you spend too much money on your clothes. And there will be people in the congregation disappointed because you buy your clothes at Walmart. And so people are going to criticize you by your appearance. People are going to criticize you by the way that you part your hair if you don't have any. You're going to be criticized by your appearance. Your time will be criticized. There's some people that will see you in the office and wonder, why don't you get out and visit more and are out among the folks? And then when you're out spending your time visiting, people will criticize you and say, well, why aren't you in your study preparing lessons for Sunday? You can't win. And so realize people are going to criticize you because of your time. Realize that people are going to criticize you because of your recreation, because of your hobby. If you have a hobby, and I believe that you as a preacher should because you need an outlet, people are going to say, well, where is your money coming for your hobby? How can you afford to do that? But yet, if I were to go to them and talk to them about their hobby and about their money, how could you afford to do what you're doing? They would have a problem with that. You see, it doesn't go both ways. So folks are going to criticize you. People are going to criticize you about your house. People are going to say, well, that house is too nice for a preacher. How can he have a house like that? I don't have a house like that. And then some people are going to criticize you and say, well, your house is too small. You make the church look bad because of where your house is located and what kind of house you have. People are going to criticize you about your lawn. People are going to say, well, your lawn is too neat. How can you spend all that time getting your lawn looking nice and neat? Or they're going to say your lawn is atrocious. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, and how dare you make the church look bad in front of your neighbors. There are going to be people who criticize your family. Help your family to understand they're going to be criticized. But just let the criticism roll off your back and you be normal. You know, you can't afford to lose your family. You can find another congregation for which to preach. Or you can be a preacher who preaches for differing churches and works during the week. but you're still a preacher. But don't let a congregation destroy your family. Family will be criticized. Your personality is going to be criticized. People will tell you that you are binding opinion when all you've done is stated the truth of the gospel. People will tell you that they don't like the fact that you come across real excited when you preach. They'll say you need to tone it down. Some people say, well, you need to get excited when you preach. So you're going to be criticized, your personality. Your friends are going to be criticized. Well, you're hanging out with so-and-so, or you're going to play golf with so-and-so, or you're going to fishing with so. Your friends you're going to be criticized because of your friends. These are just some areas. What you have to do in facing discouragement and criticism and so forth, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to conquer self-pity. You know, when you feel like you're becoming full of self-pity, get busy. Do something. Get involved in the life of somebody else. Somebody who's currently going through their own discouragement. Get involved in their life. That'll help you. Form a policy of reciprocity. Add to that. God knows what you're going through. Let Him comfort your heart. Spend time with Him in His Word. Remember, you are not totally defenseless. You're not totally defenseless. If someone attacks your character, don't remain speechless. Stand up for yourself. Never be afraid to say, you know, you're criticizing me and you're right. I was wrong. Never be afraid to say it. Avoid being thin-skinned and defensive and wearing your feelings on your shirt sleeve. And never forget the power of prayer. Whenever you're being criticized and you have incessant critics all around you, whether it be from your elders or from members of the congregation or maybe even from extended family or friends, when you're being criticized, don't forget about prayer. Get down on your knees, go into your prayer closet and pray. Another thing to keep in mind is what criticism is. Criticism is the fact that you are making an impression on somebody. You're doing something. And I'd rather be criticized for at least trying to do something than not doing anything at all. And whenever you're criticized, don't immediately think it is negative criticism. Look at it positive. What can this do to benefit me? So something to keep in mind. Another thing to think about is allow criticism to build up your self-confidence and your self-esteem. Let criticism make you better. To appropriate some words from James in James chapter 1, he says, knowing this is a trying of your faith worketh steadfastness, or stick-to-itiveness, or keep on keeping on. Allow criticism to do that for you. So you're going to be criticized. I guarantee it. You're going to meet these different types of people in the congregation who seemingly are out to get you. Deal with it. Strengthen your heart. Even Jesus was criticized. Well, let's talk about the fact that as a gospel preacher, you're going to be rejected. As a part of the discouragement, the criticism, there's just going to be the downright rejection. When you're rejected, take heart. Even God Himself was rejected. Open your Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 8. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, notice what is said in verse number 17. He will take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you. And the Lord will not hear you in that day. Now, you remember the context in 1 Samuel, the first several chapters. The people were crying out for a king. They said, God, give us a king. In other words, they were rejecting God, and they were wanting to be like the nations around them. They said, God, give us a king. God said, you don't need one. God, give us a king. You don't need one. God, give us a king. He gave them what they asked for. And there were struggles as a result of that. And so whenever you are rejected as a gospel preacher, realize that even God was rejected. When you are rejected as a gospel preacher, take heart, because even Jesus was rejected and nailed to the cross. When you are rejected as a gospel preacher, take heart, because even God's prophets were rejected. Hezekiah, Elijah, Jeremiah, others, they were rejected. When you are rejected, take heart, because even John the Baptizer was rejected. When you are rejected as a gospel preacher, take heart, because even the apostles were rejected. How are folks going to reject you? Some will reject you personally. Your personality, as we said, your appearance, your presentation. Well, I don't like the fact that he stands behind the pulpit. Why doesn't he move around in the pulpit? You're going to be rejected for silly things like that. It might be on a Sunday night that you decide to preach from the floor rather than from the pulpit behind you. You're going to be rejected for silly things. You're going to be rejected because of the way that you came across on something. Maybe you try to the best of your ability to preach the truth in the only way that you knew how. You're going to be rejected. You're going to be rejected because of your skills. Well, why do you look at your notes so much? Or why do you quote all the Scripture rather than reading to you? You're going to be rejected. You're going to be rejected because of your people skills. You're going to be rejected because you don't get out and play golf with the brethren when maybe you don't know how. You're going to be rejected because of the way you handle situations. You're going to be rejected. You're going to be rejected because of your family. You're going to be rejected because you discipline your children. When we live in a day and age in which there is less discipline of the children, and you're trying to the best of your ability to discipline God's way, you're going to be rejected. How can you spank your child? Well, God tells me to. You're going to be rejected because you're too lenient with your children. Maybe your child is one of the children that's running around the auditorium after services. Typically that's not the case, but maybe on this occasion it is, and somebody comes to you and fusses about it. I remember one time where my son, and I happened to know what was going on, my son was involved in something, and he was actually the innocent person on this occasion. But yet he was brought to me as an individual who, or as a young person who was causing problems. Well, I knew that wasn't the case, and so I had to deal with that. But you're going to be rejected because you're too lenient on your children. You're going to be rejected because you're too forward, or maybe you're a go-getter. You're going to be rejected because you're recessive. You're going to be rejected because of your defense of an illegitimate lifestyle. Maybe you preach about the sin of homosexuality or the sin of abortion or other sins of immorality, the sin of immodest dress, the sin of mixed swimming and things of that. Maybe you're going to preach about these things. I hope you do. If you're going to preach the whole counsel of God, you will. You preach about these things and people are going to reject you because they don't want to hear it. You'll be rejected. Sometimes brethren will reject your suggestions because of their traditions. Maybe you suggest that it would be a better idea for us to meet at 1:30 in the afternoon rather at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. You're going to be rejected for that. You're going to be rejected because they're too close with their money. You're going to be rejected because they're not convinced of its need and validity. Well, we don't need to involve ourselves in this type of outreach effort. You're going to be rejected because they're satisfied with the status quo. Things have been okay so far. We're just kind of going along, getting along, not causing any problem. Status quo. You're going to be rejected because you're trying to be a mover and a shaker. You're going to be rejected. Well, what are causes of rejection? Those were areas of rejection. What are causes of rejection? My mentor, Brother Wendell Winkler, as he was talking about these items as rejection of a preacher and dealing with criticism and so forth, he talked about the causes of rejection. He said that some people will reject you because they have no tolerance for the truth. They just don't tolerate the truth. Some, because of personality conflicts, some people just won't like you. They won't like the tone of your voice. They won't like the clothes you wear. They just don't like you. Sometimes it's an inner conflict between a member of the preacher's family and one of the leader's families. Sometimes the preacher doesn't relate. Let's face it, most preachers don't come from a, quote, professional background. And so maybe they can't relate professionally. Maybe the youth. Maybe you're a preacher who is on up in age and you're not relating to the youngest ones in the congregation. Or maybe you're a younger preacher and you're having a problem relating to the elderly. You're going to be rejected for that. Sometimes the expectations of the new man are too high. Well, the preacher before was great and we expect you to be just as great or greater, and if you falter in one area, you're going to be rejected. A failure to have an intricate written set of agreements, you're going to be rejected. Preacher's lifestyle is going to cause you to be rejected. Indiscreetness and things of that nature. Preacher's preaching will cause him to be rejected. Maybe it's a coarse expression, or maybe it's an awkward delivery. You know, even preachers have a bad day from time to time. That causes the preacher to be rejected. If you're a hobby writer, you're going to be rejected. If you're too repetitious, say the same thing over and over again, you're going to be rejected. If you're too shallow in your sermons, or the other extreme, you're too deep, you're going to be rejected. I knew of a preacher that was rejected not because he was too shallow, but because he was too deep. And by that I simply mean he was an individual who studied hard and delivered great sermons, but he was told, you know too much Bible. He was rejected. Sometimes if you use poor judgment, maybe you lack common sense in an area or a sense of timing, you're going to be rejected. So those are some causes of rejection. Well, how do you handle rejection? Well, you can do it this way. Understand that elders have the right and responsibility to release you as the preacher. When you are unjustly treated, be a bigger and better person than they are. Leave gracefully, and though your heart is breaking, don't try to provide recourse for them. Avoid sour grapes whenever you leave the work. Avoid that. If you are asked to leave because you've been rejected, how do you do it? How do you leave an old work gracefully? Leave so you can return. One thing that says so much for a gospel preacher is his ability to, or the congregation being willing to invite him back, maybe to preach a gospel meeting or do a special seminar. Him to be invited back to speak. Leave so you can return. Don't be disruptive when you leave. Don't get on the phone tree or the email tree and start contacting folks and letting them know the real reason why you're leaving and so forth. Don't do that. Don't be disruptive. Don't split the church. If you leave a congregation, or if the elders ask you to leave the congregation because maybe they don't like your personality, or they don't agree with a stance that you're taking, when maybe it is a matter of opinion or so forth, don't you split that church. If needs be, you leave before that would ever happen. You will be held accountable before God for destroying a church. And so keep that in mind. Don't try to circumvent the leadership. Don't go above and beyond the leadership and go to the congregation and say, well, how many of you want me to leave? Don't go to the congregation and say, well, for those who didn't want me to leave, I'm going to start this other congregation. Why don't you come with me? Don't split. Don't circumvent the leadership. Don't browbeat the next preacher who comes. Don't do that. Don't assume a martyr complex. Don't take upon you this attitude that says, well, woe is me because I've been let go, because the elders didn't like me or whatever. Don't assume the martyr complex. When you leave, make the transition smooth and leave the work better than it was when you came. That's what you need to do. Leave the work better than it was when you came. Brace and educate and shield your family as best you can. That's what you can do when you leave. Now, I guess there are some alternatives to rejection as a preacher. One alternative is you can just accept rejection, and of course that would not be the way to go. Another alternative would be you can be bitter toward God and the church, His people. That wouldn't be the way to go. Another alternative would be retaliation. Well, I'll get back at them. That, of course, wouldn't be the way to go. Or you can just quit. Just give it all up. Don't preach the gospel. Never preach the gospel again. Just quit. Well, these are not good alternatives to rejection. How should we respond to rejection? Well, we should keep our chin up. We should look to the Lord for comfort. We should recognize that we are in good company because God was rejected, His Son was rejected, the prophets of old were rejected, the apostles, the preachers of the New Testament and the apostles were rejected. We're in good company. But keep your chin up. Know you're preaching the truth in the best way that you know how, and God will reward you for doing just that. Someone once said, to write on your heart these words, in God we trust. That's right. Brethren will fail us, and we'll fail the brethren. But God will never fail us, and so we ought to find strength and comfort in trusting in our God. Here's another practical matter. If you do have to leave, then don't meddle with the church after you're gone. Leave the church alone. Pray for her. You want the church to be the best she can be. So maybe you're thinking about quitting. I'm speaking future tense, of course. But maybe you've dealt with criticism and discouragement, even rejection. And so you think about quitting. Or maybe you're just burning out. Let me give you some suggestions. First of all, stay alert. Know what's going on in the world. Did you know that even in the world, there's criticism, there's discouragement, there's rejection? Stay alert. Know what's going on in your community. Know what's going on in the church. These things will help. Know that it's not a unique situation for you. Know that, especially in our economy today, know that people right and left are losing work, maybe because of something they've not done, but they're losing their job. You're not the only one. Work to improve your personality. Help your family help you with this. Read material that will be of benefit to you. There's some great books out there that will be of help. Develop some kind of diversion in your life. I believe in having a hobby. It might be sports. It might be some other type of recreational pursuit or along those lines. And cultivate an optimistic spirit. You want to be the best preacher that you can be? You're going to have to handle that discouragement. You're going to have to deal with the criticism. You're going to have to learn how to handle rejection. And you can do it. With the Lord's help, you can do it. Now stay tuned. We're going to have a quiz immediately following this presentation. We're going to challenge you to think about some of the things that we've talked about. Don't be discouraged by it, but be encouraged by all that you're learning. Until our next class, may God bless you as you continue to study and prepare yourself to be a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ.